Howdy, folks. This video is from a show I recently did on Cameron Bertuzzi's channel, Capturing Christianity. If you like it, do all the YouTube things to let YouTube know to show the video to others. Be sure to like, comment, and share the video. And I am trying to grow my channel, so be sure and subscribe and hit the bell notification. Don't forget to check out Capturing Christianity and support the work that Cameron is doing there. Hope you enjoy this.
Are alien and UFO phenomena ultimately demonic in nature? Joining us are two distinguished guests, Jimmy Aken, a renowned Catholic apologist and senior apologist at Catholic Answers with a wealth of knowledge in theology and the paranormal, and Dr. Hugh Ross, an astrophysicist and founder of Reasons to Believe, who offers a scientific perspective grounded in the Christian faith. I've also got links to both of these guys' websites in the description of this video if you guys are interested in looking more at their work. And so in his published work, Dr. Ross, right below me, has defended the claim that aliens from a Christian perspective are ultimately demonic in nature. Jimmy Aken, on the other hand, has several reasons to doubt this view. So the structure of today's dialogue is going to go something like this. So first, we're going to actually review a clip from Tucker Carlson, of all people, who recently defended the demon aliens hypothesis on Joe Rogan's show. Now, this hypothesis has sort of always been popular among Christians, but it seems to be gaining even more traction these days from journalists like Tucker Carlson and Ross Coulthart, who have actually spent time with people, quote unquote, in the know about alien activity at the government level. So, for example, check out the show that Jimmy Aken and I did on whistleblower David Grusch, who recently testified before Congress that the U.S. is in possession of non-human vehicles and biologics. So after we review the video from Carlson, we'll turn it over to Dr. Ross for his opening comments, about 5 to 10 minutes. Then we'll pass it over to Jimmy for his opening comments, again, 5-10 minutes. And then at that point, we'll move into open dialogue. And also at the end of the show, we'll be reserving it for super chat questions. Anything that you guys want to send in and ask, we'll reserve the end of the show for that. With that said, Dr. Ross, this is your first time on the show. Welcome, welcome here. Jimmy, I mean, you've been here. You're on the board of Capturing Christianity. Everyone knows you. But Dr. Ross, this is your first time. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
All right, let's get into it. Let's go ahead and pull up the clip from Tucker Carlson, as I mentioned, and we're going to let him kind of explain some of the reasoning that has led him to be a little bit more confident about this hypothesis lately. So let's watch.
Perhaps because they don't have any explanations, because it's so beyond our comprehension that they're still trying to piece it together. Like, I would wonder how much interaction they really do have with these things. Like, if I was from another planet or if I was some interdimensional being, I don't know how much I'd give a shit about the president. I don't know how much I'd give a shit about the government. I would probably look at this infantile race, this species, this bizarre territorial apes with thermonuclear weapons, this very weird species. I'd probably look at them as very chaotic. And I wouldn't really have much concern for who's running it, especially if they have the ability to travel at insane speeds and go undetected. And
well, it depends. Like that. Okay, so the template that you're using to understand this is like science fiction, right? These are an advanced race of beings from somewhere else. But the template that every other society before us has used is a spiritual one. Mm-hmm. There is a whole world that we can't see that acts on people, a supernatural world. It's acting on us all the time for good and bad. Every society has thought this before ours. In fact, every society in all recorded history has thought that until, I'll be specific, August 1945, when we dropped the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And all of a sudden, the West is just officially secular. We're God. There is no God but us. And that's the world that we have grown up in, but that's an anomaly. Like, no one else has ever thought that. There's never been a society that thought that. Every other society has assumed, and they've had all kinds of different explanations, and the details differ, but the core idea does not differ, never has differed from caves until now, that we're being acted on by spiritual forces at all times. And so to someone born before or living before 1945, I think it would have been much more obvious that this is the thing that every society has written about. And in fact, that battle, that unseen battle around us, that spiritual battle, has like been the basis of every society, of every religion, not just Christianity. So like it just, once you discard your very, very recent assumptions, relatively speaking, about how the world works, you're like, well, that kind of seems like the obvious explanation, right?
Okay, so I was actually watching the comment section and someone saying, why are you using Tucker Carlson as a source on this? So he's not being used as a source. He's being used as someone who is articulating this view that is becoming, I think, more popular as of late. Again, especially given some of the recent information that's come out from people like David Grusch. But let's turn it over to you, Dr. Ross. Let's give you 5 to 10 minutes. Feel free to share your opening comments. You can comment on the clip from Tucker if you'd like, or you can just go ahead and just start sharing your view.
Sure. Well, I was an amateur astronomer before I became a professional astronomer. I knew the night sky quite well. And so everywhere I went, I got the job of processing UFO reports. And the vast majority of what people would come to me where they were insisting they were seeing a UFO turned out either to be a natural explanation, some kind of hoax, or secret military activity. I mean, the most common ones that I would encounter would be people seeing fireballs, the planet Venus, the rising of the Pleiades, or they had just been inside a brightly lit room, went outside, their eyes weren't dark adapted, and it takes 20 minutes before your eyes dark adapt enough that you don't start seeing little lights in the sky. So I always ask people, well, how long were you outside? Were you really dark adapted? But there is a 1% residual that doesn't fall into that category. And what's interesting about that 1% residual, it appears to defy the laws of physics. So for example, where you got multiple observers, they've been able to say, hey, we see this UFO going through the atmosphere, and they're able to triangulate the object and determine that its velocity is in excess of 5,000 miles per hour, and yet there's no sonic boom and there's no heat friction observed on the UFO so-called craft. And so no physical object would behave that way. And likewise, you have pilots reporting that they're seeing things outside their cockpit that are traveling thousands of miles per hour and yet able to make sharp right angle turns. And again, no physical object can withstand those G-forces. And therefore, we're dealing with something that's not physical. On the other hand, there have been many cases where we can show it must be real. And this would include sightings where observers see the UFO go through the atmosphere, hit the Earth, they go to the crash site, and they can see a shallow depression. They see a crater, and there's snow, the snow is melted. The vegetation is always damaged. But when you look at the site, there's no artifacts, there's no debris. If this was a physical craft, you would find debris and artifacts. But the fact that we see craters, melted snow, damaged vegetation, tells us something real caused this phenomena. And we're not dealing with a few isolated cases. Cases where we can demonstrate the reality of the event and the non-physicality of the event number over 2,000. And keep in mind with the UFO reports, it's in the tens of millions. So we're dealing with something that is not just a pie in the sky thing, lots of sightings. But as Alan Hynek, the astrophysicist that was commissioned to investigate UFOs in the 1960s, reported, it's the close encounters where we see the great mystery. And he defined a close encounter where the human comes within less than 500 feet of the UFO phenomena. And he talked about close encounters of the first, second, third kind, where in the third kind you got actual communication going on between the so-called UFO being and the human contactee. There's even instances where the animals of the human contactee have been injured or killed, and a few cases where the human itself has been killed by the event. And this is the reason why physicists like Jacques Vallée, who's devoted literally decades of studying this UFO phenomena, what I would call the residual UFO phenomena, that 1% that doesn't have a physical explanation. And he concludes that we're dealing with something that's interdimensional, some kind of phenomena operating outside the space-time dimensions of the universe. And what I've written in this book, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men, we can definitively rule out the very common explanation. We're being visited by physical beings from another planetary system. And the reason for that is that we astronomers are seriously considering sending spaceships to the nearest planet outside of our solar system. It's only 4.25 light years away. But we recognize that we have to go relatively fast to get there. And so the proposal is to go 1/10 the velocity of light. You could get there faster at 2/10, but then the damage to your craft goes up with a square of your velocity. And so astronomers are determined there's no way we can send a spacecraft to the nearest planetary system if we go faster than 1/10 the velocity of light. And even at that velocity, we have to send small spaceships, because the bigger the cross-section of the craft, the more damage it's going to take from the particles in interstellar space. And so astronomers have determined the maximum size you can send is about 10 centimeters, the size of my fist. Anything bigger than that will be destroyed before it gets there, even at just 1/10 the velocity of light. So we astronomers are actually proposing to send 1,000 tiny spaceships to the nearest planetary system. And we expect that half of the spaceships will be destroyed before they get there, but the remaining half will only be partly destroyed and partly destroyed in different ways, and we'll get back meaningful information. But if we're talking physical craft that small, you're not even going to be able to send a termite across interstellar space, let alone a being as big as us. In fact, we can't even send a microbe across interstellar space. But what I've written about in this book, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men, the only people that have the close encounters of the second, third, and fourth kind are people that are involved in the occult. And the more involved they are, the more likely they are to have one of these close encounter events. I've met individuals who have had these encounters several times, but I also met individuals where they get the occult out of their life, and that's the end of their encounters with UFOs. It doesn't happen again. So that's why we say in our book, we have a scientifically testable explanation of these residual UFOs, that 1% database where it shows to be non-physical and real. Get the occult out of your life. That'll be the end of your UFO encounters. Bring the occult into your life, and the greater degree you do, the more likely you are to have these encounters, and they're not fun. The best you're going to come away with is recurring, terrifying nightmares. Worst case, you get killed by the phenomena. So it is deleterious. It's not beneficial, which is why we conclude that the Bible got it right, that God created two species of intelligent life. We humans that are confined by the laws of physics and the space-time dimensions, and angelic beings that are not confined by the laws of physics and the space-time dimensions. And they're in two categories. You got the righteous angels and you got the evil angels. And the UFO phenomena database basically establishes we're dealing with the evil beings, the demons. And I'm not alone in making this conclusion. The 6 physicists that I know that have devoted at least 10 years to studying residual UFOs, even though I'm the only Christian amongst the group, they all conclude that there's a 1-to-1 correspondence between these residual UFOs and the occult and demonic phenomena. They may not refer to them as fallen angels, but they do say we see this 1-to-1 correspondence. So I'll stop there. If there's questions, I'll be happy to take any other questions.
So I do want to remind the audience that we will be taking super chats toward the end of the show. So if you'd like to send one in now, I will reserve it. We will bring those up toward the end. One other thing I wanted to do is give a shout out to one of our moderators, Slam RN, actually was pivotal in helping us coordinate this entire discussion. So thanks so much, Slam, for reaching out to Dr. Ross's team and helping us set this up. So, all right, Jimmy, you've got your now 5-10 minutes of your opening, and we'll begin. I'll set my timer once you begin talking.
Okay. So the first thing I'd say is that I guess I'll put my cards on the table about where I stand. So I don't know whether aliens are visiting Earth or not. I don't know whether intelligent life exists elsewhere in the cosmos. I kind of suspect it does, but I don't know if they're coming here. So that's an issue on which I'm agnostic these days. I do believe in angels and demons do affect people, and demons do impersonate, we're told, angels, and they could impersonate other things too. Angels, we're told, impersonate humans, so demons could impersonate humans, and there's no reason in principle why demons couldn't impersonate extraterrestrials. But just because something's possible doesn't mean we should leap to it as this is the explanation without good evidence for it. And I'm very concerned about seeing Christians automatically leap into the demon hypothesis when it comes to explaining UFOs. Now, like I said, I don't know if UFOs are aliens or not. I agree with Dr. Ross that the vast majority of things that people see that they identify as UFOs are really natural phenomena. It may be Venus, it may be a fireball, it may be secret military equipment, it may be any of those things. But there are residual cases that are harder to explain, and I've covered a variety of those on Mysterious World. Some of them are hard to explain. I have yet to find one that convinces me that we're dealing with anything exotic, like an extraterrestrial, a crypto-terrestrial, an interdimensional, or a time traveler. But I'm open. But what I don't see is good evidence that any of them, that they are as a group just demons. Now, if you want to propose in a particular case involving purported extraterrestrials that demons were what were involved in that case, by all means, show me the evidence. I'm very open to that hypothesis. But when we make sweeping claims like all residual UFOs are just demons, I get very concerned because in one reason being that I don't think we have good evidence for that hypothesis. And I've read Dr. Ross's book, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men. I did an episode of Mysterious World where I interacted with that. It's episode 281. You can go to mysterious.fm/281 to listen to it or watch it here on YouTube. So you can hear what I have to say in rather substantial detail in response to Dr. Ross's book. But in addition to the evidential problem, I think there's also an evangelistic problem, because this conversation is not taking place just among Christians. We've got a world watching. And when non-Christians see Christians automatically leap into the demon hypothesis, it makes us look foolish. It makes us look like we're a bunch of ignorant, superstitious, demon-obsessed fanatics. Now, we're not, but that's how it makes us look. And so I have a concern evangelistically for the souls of non-Christians that we not put Christianity in a bad light when we're talking to them. And that means that we need to be super rigorous and super careful in the evidence that we present for any hypothesis involving demons. Tucker Carlson, I think, illustrated this well. His argument essentially was, well, we have this phenomenon going on, and before the rise of space travel in the 20th century and before the dropping of the atomic bombs, people would have assumed it's a spiritual phenomena. And, well, okay, perhaps they would have, although that's actually debatable because you have individuals speculating about space travel all the way back in the AD 200s. But even if we give him that there would have been a tendency to interpret this phenomenon in spiritualistic terms prior to the 20th century, we have new intellectual options that are available now. I mean, you can't simply look at what options were available in history and confine yourself to those. If you did that, then before the 1500s, everyone would have assumed that the earth is the center of the universe, and they would have interpreted everything that they saw in the world on that basis. But now, as I'm sure Dr. Ross would agree, we have very good reason to think that the universe doesn't have a unique center, and therefore we can't say that the earth is at the center of it. But if you simply stick with a pre-scientific view of matters, it's going to make Christianity look bad. And so I'm not at all closed to saying that demons may be responsible for some UFO encounters, but we need to see good evidence of that. Now, in his opening statement, Dr. Ross mentioned a number of things, and I look forward to discussing those. I don't want to take too much time right now because I've kind of made my major points. But one of the things I've noticed in Dr. Ross's presentation of evidence is he tends to assume that we're at the peak or very close to the peak of technological development. I mean, he mentioned, for example, to just cite one example that he mentioned, residual UFOs that are tracked moving in excess of 5,000 miles an hour and not having a sonic boom or not having evidence of heat friction in the atmosphere. And he says that violates the laws of physics. Well, it violates what we can do, but we can do lots of things now with aviation technology we could not have done in the past. We can move quite a bit faster than 5,000 miles an hour. We have hypersonic craft that do that. But 100 years ago at Kitty Hawk, that would have been regarded as impossible. In fact, a lot of people thought flying itself was impossible, powered flight. And so we have to bear in mind that things will develop in the future. And we already have materials that are specially configured. They're known as metamaterials, but they're specially configured to have properties that ordinary materials don't. Like, for example, you can use metamaterials to create a kind of invisibility to various frequencies of light. This is known as metamaterial cloaking. And classically, if you go back, I remember in my lifetime, if you go back a few decades, people thought invisibility was impossible, but it turns out it's not. We can do it with metamaterials that guide the light around the structure. And in the same way, you could imagine metamaterials that guide sound or guide the atmosphere around the structure in a way that it produces no sonic boom and no heat friction. And a culture, if one existed, that's, say, 10,000 years ahead of us technologically, I can easily imagine them having such materials, and it wouldn't violate the laws of physics at all. Same thing for the right angle turns that he mentions. They may have materials that can withstand G-forces that we can't. So I think that there are a number of problems with the argumentation that Dr. Ross has presented, and I look forward to discussing it further.
All right, let's turn it over now to Dr. Ross. Feel free to pick up on anything that Jimmy just said. What we can also do is kind of go to our talking points that we had prepared before we went live with the show, which number one is kind of the arguments in support of the demon alien hypothesis. So if you'd like to return to that, feel free. Otherwise, you can feel free to interact with anything that Jimmy just said.
Yeah, well, I think he brought up an important point. Is it possible we're dealing with a physical phenomena? And yes, I can see that we could develop technology that can minimize sonic booms as we go at high speeds. And, some of the UFO phenomena, we see them going not at 5,000, but at 25,000 miles per hour. So, yeah, I mean, we're talking much higher velocities, in which case we have a more technological problem trying to eliminate the sonic boom or the lack of heat friction. And yes, we are making advances. In fact, there's a spaceship heading to the sun that's going to move at 300,000 miles per hour. So yeah, I mean, we can do that. That's why I brought up the example of actually trying to go to another planetary system. This is where we really run into the hard physics. Because interplanetary space is not a pure vacuum. There's particles there. And, you got E equals mc squared. The faster you go, the more damage you do. And the damage goes up with the square of the velocity. And the damage goes up with the cross-section of your spaceship. Which is why if you just look at the laws of physics themselves, irrespective of whatever technology we can develop, there's a limit on how big of a spaceship can possibly traverse interstellar space, which is why we had reasons to make the point that, whatever's behind these residual UFOs, we can securely eliminate the possibility that beings like us that are subject to the laws of physics are actually traversing interstellar space. I don't know of a physicist or astronomer who would ever consider that that's actually feasible for beings like ourselves to traverse interstellar space.
Oh, I do. Yep. I know quite a number of physicists who think that. Just off the top of my head, Miguel Alcubierre and Sabina Hassenfelder would be two examples I'd cite. Now, I agree that right now, given the technology we have now or are likely to have in the next 100 years, that going to Proxima Centauri using a cloud of tiny spaceships would be our best way to get there. So I think I'm all on board with that. I think it's an exciting project, and I hope it happens. But once again, who says we're near the peak of technological development? Just because we don't have the materials to manufacture a ship that would take a human to another star system doesn't mean that's impossible. In fact, as I'm sure you know, von Neumann probes have been proposed, where you would have craft that would self-replicate, and you could potentially colonize an entire galaxy within 1 million years or so using self-replicating probes. In addition to that, there are a variety of physicists who believe that faster than light travel is something that could one day become a reality. The two I mentioned, Miguel Alcubierre and Sabine Hassenfelder, are just two of them. There's been a lot of work done in physics recently about the possibility of faster than light travel, and it doesn't violate Einstein's laws. They do set limits on what you can do.
It doesn't violate Einstein's laws, but look at the energy you need. I'm familiar with a paper written by a group of theoretical physicists at Baylor University who said, yes, we can build a physical craft that can travel faster than the velocity of light. And what we do is we expend the energy that's necessary to warp the space-time fabric in front of the spaceship. And that doesn't violate the laws of physics. On the other hand, you have to convert the mass of Jupiter into pure energy every second to make that happen. And so when you look at the energy requirements, you basically come to the conclusion, no matter what technology we develop, that's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to convert the total mass of Jupiter into pure energy every second and control it in such a way that you don't damage the spaceship. But theoretically, it's possible. And, we need to understand that people like Sabine, they're theoretical physicists, and they are fond of showing you things where the mathematics works. So it becomes mathematically impossible. I'll give you an example. Wormholes are mathematically possible, but they're a physical impossibility, because to make a wormhole work, you got to take the singularity of two different black holes, have them perfectly touch one another and remain stable. The math works, but the possibility of that ever happening is zero. It's not going to happen. And so when you read the theoretical literature, you need to appreciate that often these mathematical physicists are speculating about what's mathematically possible, but they'll freely admit, no, we're not talking something that's physically possible. So I think that helps lay people appreciate, okay, there's actually whole journals where scientists are encouraged to speculate, even though we realize what they're talking about are physical impossibilities.
Yeah, and I'd say two things about that. The first one is you're very right that there are physicists who get tangled up in mathematical ideas that don't appear to have any correspondence to reality. And actually, Sabine Hassenfelder is one of the foremost people in pointing that out. One of her books is called Lost in Math, where she points out how physicists go down these mathematical rabbit trails that don't correspond to reality. She's actually very grounded in the need for observation to support ideas that have been proposed. But the fact that something is possible means that we have to take it seriously as an option, not for us, but for people who are advanced compared to us. For example, Michio Kaku, another physicist, in his book, The Physics of the Impossible, divides things that are quote unquote impossible into three categories. He calls them the first type 1 impossibilities, which are things we're not likely to have within 100 years. And then type 2 impossibilities are things we might have in 10,000 years or 1 million years. And then type 3 impossibilities are things we're never going to get. And he only has two things in that last category, and faster than light travel is not one of them. He would consider that a type 2 impossibility, meaning we can't do it with our level of technology, but someone 10,000 or 1 million years ahead of us could be able to do it. And since it's not physically impossible, I think we have to say, well, could there be civilizations out there that are 10,000 years ahead of us or 1 million years ahead of us? And given that the universe is 13.8 billion years old, I think that we have to say, yeah, there could be some that are like that. And so we can't dismiss things that we don't know how to do as being impossible for a race like that. And so I don't think that we have good evidence for saying that UFOs cannot be physical. In fact, the evidence we have points towards physicality for them. Now, they may be able to do things that we can't, but we have evidence for physicality because, as you point out in your book, people photograph them and they can sometimes be picked up on radar. Well, light and radar are both forms of electromagnetic radiation, and the way photographs work and the way radar works is the electromagnetic radiation strikes an object and bounces off of it, and that's a purely physical interaction. So purely spiritual beings don't have physical forms. They might appear to us in a vision or telepathically or something like that, but if we're getting pictures and radar returns, that is prima facie evidence that these things are physical. Also,
well, not necessarily. I mean, for example, what you see in a lot of these phenomena is that the object is photographed, but the human observer doesn't see it, or the radar doesn't pick it up. To be a physical object, all detection devices should be able to record it equally. And that's something that we often see is missing in the UFO phenomena. Some of the instruments pick it up, but not all the instruments do. And keep in mind what you see in the Bible is that these angelic beings sometimes do appear in physical form, but only for a short period of time. So you got Abraham, for example, feeding dinner to angels. So at least from a Christian biblical perspective, there is a possibility that they can temporarily take on physical form. As you mentioned, they can appear like a human being. They can appear like an animal. I think the leprechaun phenomena probably fits in that category, and they can appear as a physical craft, but it's always in a temporary situation. And, in terms of, what you're talking about, well, this is actually possible. We could go faster than light. We could, but you're not going to hide the energy. The energy required to make that happen is so extreme that there's no way an astronomer would not see that energy exploitation going on. And then you got the problem is we've yet to find a site outside of planet Earth that could be a candidate to host any kind of being like ourselves. I mean, everywhere we look beyond planet Earth, we do see some places where you might have microbes temporarily existing. But that's a possibility. It's never been proven. But what is quite consistent with scientific literature, we can rule out big beings like ourselves. We've yet to find any site. In fact, we can't even find a star that's sufficiently like our sun to be a candidate to have a planet orbiting it on which advanced life is possible. So
let me comment on that. The first of all, though, I want to agree with you once again that it is possible for angelic beings to take on physical form temporarily. The medieval theologians referred to those as aerial bodies. The idea that they had was they could condense these bodies out of the air and use them temporarily, and then they'd disperse again when they were done. Now, I don't know that that's what angels and demons are actually doing. I don't know that they're condensing air to take on physical form. But my point remains, if you have photographs and radar returns, that's prima facie evidence for the physical. And you need something more than that to say, okay, but this was just a temporary physical form. Now, I suspect you would, to try to support that claim, go to the crash situations you mentioned, where snow gets melted and plants get damaged, but you don't find residue of a craft. Well, okay, fine, but these could be interdimensionals that are not angels or demons. They could be from another physical universe. They could be just as physical as we are, and they could just shift back to their own universe. They could be going back and forth. That also might explain why you don't always have all observers agreeing. Now, sometimes observers don't agree because some people aren't looking in the right direction during the brief time one of these things is in the sky. And sometimes they might have a cloaking technology that prevents them from being detected by radar because the radar returns are not always there. So there are a variety of explanations for that, but there's also another thing that points towards physicality, and that is UFO debris, because there are a variety of cases where UFOs have discharged material or even exploded where material has been found at the crash site. And unlike the aerial body of an angel or a demon, those remains don't disintegrate afterwards. They've been taken into custody and they've been studied by contractors who are working for our government. And some of them have been found to have metamaterial properties. So that would be evidence pointing in favor of not just temporary physicality, but ongoing physicality. Now, in terms of, are there places where life might exist elsewhere in the universe? I think you and I are actually on the same page when it comes to places for microbes. I believe I heard you once say that we could find microbes on Mars. And I agree with that. I think that actually
what
the
I'm
evidence
saying is we can
Mhm.
find the remains of microbes on Mars. I don't think
Remains.
we're going to find viable microbes. The
Okay.
Martian conditions aren't adequate for the microbes to survive. I actually have been on record in saying we have a better shot of finding these remains on the moon.
On the moon. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for the simple reason Earth has been exporting microbes literally for billions of years. And so the remains of Earth exported microbes are going to be throughout the solar system. But our best shot is the moon. The moon has over 100 times as much Earth material on its surface than Mars does. So, in fact, I've been on record saying we'll never find the fossils of Earth's first life on planet Earth. Our geology has destroyed them, but we will find them on the moon. And so, as a Christian, I'm excited about that because we can go to the moon, find the fossils of Earth's first life, and see who got the origin of life model right, the theists or the non-theists. So, and that's a
And
relatively easy exploration to do.
Yeah, and I'd agree with you there. I think that would be great. In terms of viable life elsewhere, well, so as you know, in the astrophysical and astronomical communities, there are a variety of opinions about how common life would be apart from Earth. And one of the hypotheses is known as the rare Earth hypothesis, and it says that habitable places like Earth are going to be very, very rare. You're an advocate of the rare Earth hypothesis, and you take it to a degree that even most rare Earthers do not. In fact, as far as I'm aware, you're unique in that in your book you say that that intelligent life should not exist anywhere else in the cosmos at all, that it's mathematically impossible. And that's
I'm
a
basically
position.
saying it's physically impossible. It's not just mathematically impossible.
Mhm.
We have yet to find a galaxy other than our own galaxy that could be a candidate for advanced life. And in our own galaxy, we can't even find a star beyond our sun that could be a candidate. So that's
Yeah.
why I'm a proponent of the rare Earth hypothesis.
Mhm.
And in fact, I'm even skeptical we're going to find a place where you can have viable microbes living for more
Mhm.
than a few months. Because
Okay.
we've searched and we're not finding anything. And we're
Right.
certainly not finding anything close.
So I'll make 2 points about that. The first one is, so you are a rare earther and you're a pretty extreme rare earther, and that position is not broadly, and certainly not your version of this position, is not broadly accepted in the scientific community. There are a lot of
Well,
people.
I do see it in the scientific literature. I mean, I'm not alone. I mean,
I would be fascinated if you could send me some names of other people who think life cannot exist anywhere else in the universe at all. I would love to see some papers on that.
okay,
But
advanced light,
um,
no problem. I mean, you are right. There are astronomers saying we can't shut the door on microbes. And I would agree, maybe there could be some places where microbes could exist for a short period of time. But if you want to have advanced life, you got to have those microbes hanging around for a minimum of 3 billion years. And they need to be there without interruption. And so, and now we got
I'd
a
say
time
1
bomb.
billion, but I'd say
No,
1 billion because that's how long it took on Earth from the Cambrian explosion to now. But my
well, it
broader
took 3
point,
billion
my
years to
broad,
lead up to it.
yeah, my broader point is that in the scientific community, there is a broad range of opinion on this question. And so I respect your position as one, but I recognize that there are a lot of other people in the scientific community who are much more optimistic, both about life and intelligent life. That's why we have some active candidate worlds that we found as exoplanets that are being looked at very carefully right now for apparent biosignatures. Now, they may or may not pan out, but it's under active discussion. Similarly, there have been people trying to estimate technologically advanced life and its prevalence using the so-called Drake equation. I was recently looking at one current reapplication of the Drake equation that estimated that there could be as many as 20,000 technologically advanced civilizations in the Milky Way. And so I understand that you wouldn't go in that direction, but a lot of scientists do. And I think it's important that the audience understand the breadth of scientific opinion on this question when they think about the question of what could UFOs be. I also have another point, but go ahead first.
Yeah. I've actually taken courses from both Frank Drake and Carl Sagan when I was younger, and they expounded about this Drake equation. But they're also both very clear to admit if the probability of any one of the factors in the equation is zero, the end result is zero. And they just said, and back in the 60s and 70s, they said, we don't really know what these probabilities are. Carl just assumed that each probability was 10%. Well, we're no longer in the 1960s. We know that a number of factors in the Drake equation are way more improbable than 10%.
That's why I cited a recent application of it, not a historic one, because Drake was way more optimistic. But even in modern, this was just this week. You know, you have one application of it saying as many as 20,000.
Yeah, no, I mean, the fact that we can't even find another star in our Milky Way basically makes that 20,000 statement totally absurd. I mean, you got to find at least a star like the sun, and that we haven't done.
Well, I mean, except our sun is a fairly ordinary. I mean, you're low. Well, I have a second point I really want to get to, so I don't want to be detained by the nature of our sun and how common it is. So my second point is this. In your book, you argue that it's mathematically and physically impossible for life to exist elsewhere in the universe, except maybe some microbes for a short period of time. But intelligent life is certainly impossible. And you also argue that the problem of abiogenesis, or how life comes from non-living matter, is also mathematically impossible. So you shouldn't have life developing anywhere, and it shouldn't become intelligent. And okay, even if now to get to that point, you use some numbers that are and various variables that are not broadly accepted in the scientific community, but one can still make the case. So let me say, I'll just give you all of the mathematical impossibility, all of the physical impossibility that you mentioned, and assume your calculations are correct. Well, there is a problem with that, which is life does exist somewhere. It exists right here. And you would say it's because God made it here. God perfectly designed not just our universe, but also our solar system to host life and to host intelligent life. And he made us here. And so God overcame the problem of abiogenesis, and he guided our development towards our modern human form, and he did all this great stuff for us. Okay, yeah, I'll give you all that. There are other perspectives, but I'll just say, yeah, okay, he did that. Now, if he did that here, he could do that anywhere. And so all of the arguments...
To be very clear,
hang on.
I totally agree. I'm agreeing with you, because I've put in my books that, hey, what I'm ruling out is a naturalistic explanation for intelligent life elsewhere. I'm not ruling out the possibility that God did the same thing on another planet that he's done here on Earth. I'm basically saying the supernatural question is open. It's the naturalistic answer that's closed.
Good.
So,
and I would, on your math, which I haven't gone through in super great detail, so I'm just giving it to you. On your math, that you would be right. You can preclude a naturalistic creation for life elsewhere in the universe. But as you've said, you can't exclude a supernatural one.
Right,
And therefore, if God made life here, God could have made it elsewhere in the universe, including elsewhere in the Milky Way. And there could be those 20,000 different extraterrestrial civilizations that God set up. Now, given the number of stars in the Milky Way, we may not have found one yet, but it seems that you're conceding the possibility that they're there. And if they're there, or if there's a possibility that they're there, then we have to take that into account when we think about what could explain UFOs, because maybe God just made other children a few star systems away. We haven't found them yet by our telescopes, but maybe they're coming over for a visit.
So I'd like to really quickly, Dr. Ross, I'm sure you'd like to come back in, and I'm going to give you a chance in just a second. But I wanted to just sort of highlight the fact I'd like to switch topics and discuss some actual cases of alien reports and see whether or not they fit with either hypothesis. So Dr. Ross, feel free to come back on that. And then at some point we will try to transition to talk about some concrete cases.
Well, let me at least make a brief response to this in the sense that if we're talking the Milky Way galaxy, I think we can observationally rule out the possibility there's another site. What we can't rule out, maybe there's a galaxy 10 billion light years away that over the past 10 billion years, because now we're in the present, there could have been changes within that galaxy that allow God to create intelligent species there. It's the Milky Way galaxy in our local group that I think we can definitively rule out, but we can't rule out very distant systems. So, but that again leads to a light travel time problem. If they're physical craft, they got a long way to go. And the other thing I would point out, there are papers in the scientific literature saying there could be intelligent beings like us in the universe, but not before us. They're going to come after us. We have to be the first because it takes a minimum of 13.8 billion years to bring intelligent life upon the cosmic scene. And since we're talking light travel, the future could allow for the possibility of beings like us, but not the past.
Yeah, so that's a new argument. So I'd like to interact with that just briefly before we move on to cases. Even if I grant that it takes about 13.8 billion years to get intelligent life, and I understand that you're not going to have intelligent life in the first several billion years because the stars haven't yet generated the kinds of elements that you need to build complex life. So yeah, it's going to take billions of years before you get to intelligent life. And supposing that 13.8 is the relevant number, 13.8 is an approximation. And so there could be species that are out there now that are 10,000 or a million years ahead of us, because on the scale of billions of years, 10,000 or a million years is a rounding error. And so you can't say we must definitively be the first. The proposal you're making, the so-called progenitor hypothesis, that we're the first intelligent life, is a possibility. But given the scale of the time periods we're talking about, there could easily be something else out there that's thousands or even millions of years ahead of us, because on the scale of billions of years, that's just rounding.
Yeah, no, I would argue that if you're talking thousands of years, you got a point. A billion years? No, that's way too far.
A million. I didn't say a billion.
Yeah, a million is within the realm of possibility as well. But now we're looking at, hey, you need to go farther away than a million light years, or you need to go farther away than, say, 10 million light years, because we've already been able to rule out the local group. So now we're talking long travel time.
Not all the physicists and astrophysicists agree with that. I mean, that is one opinion, but that's not the only opinion, is what I would point out.
I'm talking again advanced life.
Yeah, me too.
Let's talk now about some concrete cases. And Jimmy, I want to kind of pass this over to you, because this falls more on the, I think, arguments against side of things. There's two that come to my mind, and maybe you know of others that may be a little bit harder to explain on the demons aliens hypothesis. But the two that come to mind for me are David Grusch, who recently testified, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, before Congress, and says that the U.S. is in possession currently of about a dozen downed non-human spacecraft. And so maybe Ross, you can comment on that. You don't have to. Again, I'm gonna pass it over to Jimmy and let him kind of pick the cases that he'd like to discuss. But another one that actually came to mind was the case in Zimbabwe of the school children. I think it was in 1994, where they were they experienced these beings, and there was a couple students that experienced these like two beings that came out and actually kind of communicated with them in a way. And one of the things that she said in this there was a recent documentary on Netflix that just came out. I think it was called Encounters, and they interviewed them recently about their experiences in the 1990s, and they said that they communicated with them, and the message that they both received was basically identical. But the message that they received was basically that it was a sort of environmental type concern that they had about the planet. Like, we need clean air, we need clean soil and stuff, and that was the message that they both received, which that seems to me like a bit of an odd thing to communicate if these are demons who are interested in sort of seeing the destruction of humans. And so that seems a little bit to be inconsistent with the demons aliens hypothesis. I'm sure, Dr. Ross, you've got plenty of thoughts on that, but Jimmy, let me pass it over to you, and if you know of any other cases that you think might be more interesting here or better evidence against that hypothesis, I'll let you take it from here.
Okay. Well, so with regard to David Grusch, I have, as I've mentioned previously when we've discussed him, I have a concern, which is all of his information is secondhand. He claims that the government has these crashed, UFOs, or crashed or abandoned. And if that's true, well, then that would mitigate against the demon hypothesis, because they would be physical entities that continue to exist in a stable manner. And so that would count against the demon hypothesis. But the problem is, and the same thing for the biological materials he mentions, the problem is that he hasn't seen any of this himself. It's all people telling him this. And so I would love
quick
for what
clarification
he says to be true. Mm-hmm.
Quick clarification. I'm not sure if that's true. I think when he went before Congress, and I could be wrong about this, but I think he revealed a little bit more information about things that he had personally seen at Congress. Maybe that's wrong, but I think there was some development. And the reason why he was basically given the impression that he had only seen things secondhand was because he wasn't really at liberty to do that in the initial interview I think he did with the News Nation. So I think he did eventually come out and say that he had seen some things personally. So I could be wrong about that.
Yeah. So I haven't seen that, but I would say I still kind of want to put a pin in it with regard to David Grusch's claims until such time as I can verify that he has seen some of this stuff, because otherwise it's all secondhand. And even if he has seen some strange things, I would want to look into it deeper and say, could this have been part of a psyop? Could they have been showing him something and misrepresenting what it was? So, I think that we need to have a healthy skepticism. If his claims are true, it would strike against the demon hypothesis. But I don't want to just rush into accepting his claims because they'd be convenient for my position.
Let's get Dr. Ross to comment on that, since you did talk about David Grusch for a little while.
Yeah.
Right. And I was in Washington, D.C. a few months ago and actually got to talk to somebody who was part of that congressional committee meeting. And basically what he told me, he was a general in the Army, and he basically said none of the congressmen accepted he had any credibility for the claims that he was making. And you are right. He was claiming hey, it's not just secondhand. I've seen stuff. But he wasn't able to come up with any physical evidence for any of the claims he made. Also, what caused doubt on the part of the congressional committee is how he toned down his previous public claims. Previously he was saying, hey, the U.S. government has actual bodies of these UFO beings. He's now saying, no, they have biologic material. And the congressman said, well, can you define what you mean by the biologic material? And he refused to define it. So I'm in agreement that we need to be skeptical about David Grusch's claims. And, one of the co-authors we have on this book, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men, is Dr. Mark Clark. And, he was part of the Reagan administration. And so I had him write the chapters in the book. Is government security adequate to cover up the idea that the government has had physical evidence of these UFO craft that dates back 70 years? And he basically says, yes, our government does have security systems in place, but it's orders of magnitude weaker than would be necessary to support the claims of David Grusch and others. That evidence would have come out. And, in terms of people actually claiming we got physical debris, well, it's been put forward, but nobody's been able to prove that it's extraterrestrial beyond the fact that it's meteoritic. I mean, I got pieces in my home of meteors that are 4 billion years old. They are
Me too.
extraterrestrial. Yeah. So there is extraterrestrial stuff we have on Earth, but the idea that it's the remains of a spaceship, that's what's not can be established. People have made the claims, but nothing shows up in the peer-reviewed scientific literature saying this is definitive proof that we've been visited by physical craft.
Okay, so that was a bad example. You guys agree on that? That's nothing interesting. let's maybe turn to.
Got a couple little things to add. First of all, I want to compliment Dr. Ross's marketing skills for getting the mention of his book "Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men" in again. And I just, whenever he does that, I need to mention. And if you want to see what I had to say about it, you can go to mysterious.fm/281. Also, as I mentioned earlier, and I also have an episode on UFO crash debris. And one of the things we talk about in that is how some of the material that has been found and, allegedly comes from a crashed UFO is metamaterialistic in nature. It has very fine grooves on it at the microscopic scale that are designed to channel certain frequencies. And so that's more than just a meteorite that falls in your backyard. I mean, I love meteorites. I have a piece of one in the other room, but if it's both extraterrestrial and metamaterialistic, that is suggestive of a physical UFO that has not simply evaporated like an angel's aerial body. That's all I wanted to say on that. In terms of the other case you mentioned, the Zimbabwe UFO encounter, I'm familiar with that one. I haven't yet studied it in detail. I do plan to do an episode on it, but I haven't done the research yet. One of the common themes, though, connecting that to other reported messages from extraterrestrials is an environmental concern. And that actually goes way back to the Contactees in the 1950s. And it's become more prominent as environmental messaging has become more common in our society. So prima facie, that could be evidence that this is just human imagination rather than something aliens would actually be concerned with. On the other hand, it's possible that if there are extraterrestrials visiting us, that they see us going down a bad path environmentally and they want to warn us about it. So it would be quite possible that if we are on the verge of an environmental disaster, that if we've got space brothers visiting us, they might want to tell us about it. So I kind of go both ways on that. But that would be a positive message. On the other hand, if I can anticipate what Dr. Ross might say, the devil disguises himself as an angel of light. So he could wrap his lies in a good, positive overall message. And that's true. On the other hand, you need to find where the lies are. And so, because the devil's not going to just show up and tell you truth. So, Dr. Ross, why don't you take it and give us some of the evidence why you think that some of these messages are false, and then I'll interact with that.
Well, I think, you said you've read the book, so I think you would have seen how we talk about that. The messages that people get from these UFO encounters changes over time and keeps pace with our technology, keeps pace with our knowledge about the universe. So if you go back 150 years, they were claiming to be from the backside of the moon.
Yeah, where is that one? Where is that encounter from? Because I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, you're probably familiar with the claims that they're from Mars and Venus. I mean, that's well documented. So, and now they're claiming to be from another planetary system, mainly because lay people today around the world realized Venus and Mars are not candidates. And so they've changed their story. And then the way they appear to us, I mean, The UFO phenomena goes back at least 3,000 years, but we do notice that they seem to be keeping pace with our technology. So instead of appearing as slow-moving objects in the sky, like the dirigibles we had 100 years ago, World War II, they were the Foo Fighters, moving at the speed of sound. Now they're going as fast as our fastest spaceships. And so I document that as all evidence that we're dealing with something deceptive. I mean, if this was really beings that had our best interests at heart, why wouldn't they be telling us the truth? Why wouldn't they be telling us the truth from the beginning? So I'm basically saying I'm suspicious. I'm not trying to make a hard and fast claim here, but I said, this is reason to have doubt about the messages we're getting from these beings.
Okay. So my perspective on that. Now, in your book, you talk about messages received by both contactees and abductees. And for people who may not be familiar with what those terms mean, the contactees were a group of people who got kind of started in the 1950s in a notable way. The first major one was a gentleman named George Adamski. And the contactees claimed to be in regular contact with extraterrestrials, and they would claim to occasionally be taken on kind of joyrides on the spaceships and go visit Venus and go visit Mars and places like that. And they also made a bunch of wildly inaccurate religious claims. They would say Jesus drives a flying saucer and stuff like that, and he's one of them rather than one of us. The abductees are later. They kind of sort of got started in the 60s, notably with Betty and Barney Hill. But then they really took off like in the 1980s, and they claim to be kidnapped, that's abducted or kidnapped by aliens. And sometimes the aliens will give them messages and things like that. But I have an issue with the contactees in that I think they're all fake. I don't think we have good evidence that any of them were in contact with actual extraterrestrials. I think that they were fantasists who were making stuff up. And you can even look at their claims and how they kind of one up each other, to make themselves more prominent individually. With abductees, I think that a lot of the material that gets reported in books has come from hypnotic regression. And the problem with hypnosis is it is not a magic memory aid. It does not help you remember things better. In fact, it promotes confabulation. And so I don't think we can trust a lot of the material that abductees have reported. What I would say, though, my hypothesis would explain is what you just mentioned about where they say they're from, whether it's the dark side of the moon or Venus or Mercury or Mars or a planet in another solar system, how that tracks with popular astronomical knowledge is evidence that the source of these claims is human. It's coming from popular astronomical knowledge. When people thought Venus and Mars were habitable, they would make up stories saying, oh yeah, I talked to aliens and they were from Venus and Mars. Now that that's known not to be possible, I talked to aliens and they said they're from another solar system. So I think that my hypothesis that this is just fantasist material explains the progression that you point to. And I think it does it better than an actual demon hypothesis, because if they really were demons, given them this information, then why didn't they? I'm not surprised they'd tell us lies, but why didn't they tell us better lies? Why didn't they tell us lies that would stand up on further scientific examination? The demons, say 100 years ago, could have said, oh yeah, we're from another solar system. And they didn't say that. They said that they were from Venus and Mars. And that would be falsified within just a few decades. But if you really wanted to play a long con on the human race, you really wanted to get yourselves in good, you wouldn't want to make easily falsifiable lies that'll be proven false within just a few years.
Well, I agree with much of what you say. In fact, when I talk to people who've claimed to have had these encounters or these abductions, I come as a skeptic and say, look,
good for
and
you.
I try to ask questions because in my experiences, a lot of them, what they claim to be an encounter really is an encounter. It's psychologically induced.
Mhm.
But I'm also seeing cases where it looks like, wait a minute, there is something demonic going on, because I ask them questions. Well, how frequently is this happening? Ask them questions about their involvement in the occult. I mean, I ran into one young man who was having these encounters, and I said, well, and he claimed, I'm clean with respect to the occult.
Mhm.
I have not been touching any of this stuff. So he's basically saying, I don't think what you're telling me is a possibility. And I said, well, who are you sleeping with? Because I knew he wasn't married. And he says, oh, my girlfriend is a witch. So I said, okay, well, what is she doing? And she was very deeply involved. So I said, it tells us in the Bible that uh, when you have a sexual encounter with an individual, you become one with an individual. There will be consequences, which is why we're exhorted in the Bible to maintain sexual purity, because of what happens when you have these sexual encounters. But he was completely blown away. So I had no idea that that could be an open door. And, I've seen this in my fellow astronomers. I mean, I
Mhm.
remember two astronomers coming on our radio telescope. And every time they came on, they had a UFO encounter. And I said, this is weird. They're only logging 3 hours of time on the telescope every year. And every time they come on, these encounters happen. I'm logging 1,500 hours a year and I see nothing. And I knew several other astronomers that likewise were having all this time in the telescope. They didn't see nothing. But there's a difference. They were deeply involved in the occult. The rest of us were not.
Yeah,
So,
so let's talk about the term occult for a second. Now, this term has grown in popularity in recent years. Originally, occultus in Latin just means hidden. It doesn't mean anything bad. And so, anything that was hidden from the knowledge of man was considered occult. A classic example in the Middle Ages was magnets, because nobody knew how magnets worked. And so, you'd have theologians like Thomas Aquinas saying things like, um, God has hidden from the knowledge of man what gives a magnet its virtue, its power. And that was true until the early 20th century, when we figured out how quantum mechanics works and we learned how magnets work. But nobody considered magnets bad or spooky or anything like that. That's a more recent development of the term occult. And I've looked, in fact, just yesterday on another project, I was looking up the word occult in multiple dictionaries to try to find is there any stable basis for or common core to this term. And what I found is dictionaries are all over the map when it comes to how they define the word occult. Frankly, I don't think it's a useful term. But it does get used as a dismissive term or even a derisive term for some practice that I don't personally approve of. I'm going to call that occult. What that means is the term occult has to be defined by each person because everybody
right.
uses it differently. So
No,
could you
I
tell
agree. Yeah.
good. So could you
Yeah.
tell me, what do you consider occult? What
Well, I
specific things?
define it the way the Bible defines it, a
The
human
Bible
being.
doesn't define it. It's
Well, it
the word.
doesn't use the word occult, but it does talk about individuals who are trying to get power from a supernatural being. And so going into some kind of a seance, astrology is mentioned in the Bible. These are all ways that, according to the Bible, you can open yourself up to demonic influence. And the
Except
point
the
I'm
Bible
making,
doesn't say that. The Bible
it,
doesn't say by doing. And now I don't approve of astrology, but
right.
the Bible does mention astrology, but it doesn't say you open yourself to demons by doing astrology. In fact, you have the Magi showing up to honor the Christ child by astrology. So
Well,
it seems
I
to me
would
we're
dispute
putting
that.
together some things.
Yeah, I mean, it is true the Magi have been referred to as astrologers. The term actually refers to people educated in Eastern science. It doesn't necessarily imply that they were astrologers. So,
Except they came because of a star.
yes, but keep in mind that Daniel was also referred to as a wise man, and it's Daniel that actually predicted the timing of the coming of the Messiah. So, there's a reason why these wise men from the East knew the timing of the coming of the Messiah, whereas the rabbis in Jerusalem were ignorant about that, but they knew the location. So the combination of the location and the timing is what got the wise men to the newborn Jesus. But that's off topic. I'm basically agreeing with you. We got to be careful how we use the term occult. And, the context I'm using it is people who are trying to get supernatural power or supernatural information. And the point I'm also making is that, where you open yourself up is that you're giving permission for these beings to invade your life. That's kind of the main point of the book. If you don't give them permission, you're not going to have these close encounters with UFOs. If you do give them permission, don't be surprised if this happens. And statistically, we see this. I mean, I went to the Soviet Union when the Soviets were running the show, and I discovered there was a way higher incidence of people having these claimed encounters with UFOs. But that was a time when Russia had a much higher percentage of the population involved in trying to come up with these supernatural. In fact, what was interesting, the major universities and technological institutes in the Soviet Union at that time were actually sponsoring research in occult physics with the goal of coming up with supernatural weapons that they could use against the West. Now that they've stopped doing that, the level of encounters, close encounters with these UFOs has plummeted. So I'm saying you have to explain the historical correlations.
Okay,
Jimmy,
so
I know, I have an idea of where you're going to go. I think you're going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're going to say that there are reports of people being possessed or dealing with demons that don't have any affiliation with the occult. And there are historical records of that as well. So you and I actually talked about that recently. Is that what you were going to mention? Or?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
No, I was going to say, I could say that, but what I was actually going to say is it seems to me that this evidence is anecdotal. And one of the problems with anecdotal, we don't have any statistical surveys of this showing, involvement in astrology or, going to psychics or using witchcraft or anything like that, which I assume are the types of things you would put under the heading of occult. We don't have any statistical surveys that show that people who have this happen get abducted by UFOs. And there are cases where people who don't do those things have encounters with apparent extraterrestrials. To cite just two examples, Jimmy Carter, before he was president, had a UFO encounter. Now, he didn't meet aliens. He did see a UFO, but he was a Southern Baptist, and he described himself as born again. Another more recent individual is named Chris Bledsoe. He lives in North Carolina, and he had encounters with UFOs where he did and does talk to them, according to him. And he's a deacon in a Pentecostal holiness church. So, these are serious Christians. And now you might be able to probe and say, well, does someone connected with them have involvement in quote unquote the occult? But you can do that with anybody. You can, we're all 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon. And so you could take anybody and find someone in their orbit who has a connection with the occult and then say, there's your connection. So this style of reasoning looks kind of like the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy, where you draw the circles around the target after the event has happened. So in order to really have good evidence that there's a correlation here, we would need a different type of evidence than what we have. It would need to be more than anecdotal. But having said that, let's just grant that you're right, that people who have involvement in the occult, whatever that is, have more of these encounters. Okay. What that could show us is that some encounters of UFOs or aliens are demonic. But I admitted in my opening remarks, I don't have a problem with that. If you've got evidence in a particular case or particular cases that demons are involved, then have at it. That's great. Show us the evidence. My problem is in claiming that they all are. and some anecdotal cases about individual people who have occult involvement, also having UFO encounters, does not get us to all of them are extraterrestrial when we have countervailing evidence like apparent metamaterials from crashes that don't dissolve like an aerial body would dissolve.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm probably more in agreement with you than you imagine, in the
Good.
sense that I am encouraged that you're willing to acknowledge that, hey, I'm open to the idea that some of these indeed could be demonically connected. And that's my whole point, is that when I have someone report to me, my immediate assumption is this is not demonic. I'm going to go after other things first. If I rule out everything else, then I begin to consider the demonic. And in terms of these circles, I'm only going out one circle, because that's something I see within the Bible, is that, hey, we're talking Kevin Bacon. That's way too far to have any influence in your life. If you're talking a father or a grandfather, that's close enough to have, because at least in my
Takes two
experience with
circles.
demonology, they can work through a close relative or a sexual partner, but not a distant relative. So I keep my circle quite small. And so, like you, I come at this with some skepticism, but I do realize, hey, a lot of what I experience, I can see a demonic connection. But a lot of what people claim as a demonic connection, I can rule out and say, no, that's not what happened to you. And you mentioned Jimmy Carter. I mean, what he described, I'm saying, I'm not at all convinced that what he's describing is in that 1% residual. It might
I'm
be
not
in
either.
the 99%. So in which
Yeah.
case, I don't see that as a credible claim of some kind of demonic encounter in his life. And I don't know about his close relatives, but I'm willing to bet that he's probably in the 99%, not the 1%. So I think a healthy dose of skepticism is appropriate here. My concern is people who basically say none of them are demonic. I mean, I've had enough experience. I've been a pastor for 50 years in a church between Caltech and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And we've had witchcraft covens come into our area. So I've had a considerable amount of experience dealing with phenomena where I said, at least from my perspective, and again, it's anecdotal, but at least from my perspective, I had many instances where it seems clear cut we're dealing with something demonic. And, I trust the Bible. The Bible tells us that angels are real. Some are righteous, some are evil, and they're active. The book of Daniel especially talks about all of this. Now, I do know some scientists that are trying to get beyond the anecdotal approach. Even though we're dealing with 30 million cases where people claim to have these encounters, that's still anecdotal. But for example, there was a physicist at Stanford University. He was one of the founders of the journal I'm sure you're aware of, the Journal of Scientific Exploration. And so I remember some 40, 50 years ago, he did a survey of astronomers that were members of the American Astronomical Society, trying to come up with some statistics about these UFO phenomena. But what he discovered was only 20% of the members of the American Astronomical Society actually completed the survey. And so he stated in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, I attempted to get something that was meaningfully statistical. 20% is not bad, but it's not good enough that I can actually claim that this is beyond anecdotal. And there have been other attempts, but I do agree with you. We need to take it beyond the anecdotal, even though the anecdotal database is enormous.
Dr.
Yeah,
Ross, you
and-
actually answered a question that I was going to ask you. I mean, while I've got you on Capturing Christianity, one thing you guys both agree on is that demons do exist. I mean, they've got to exist in order to even use them as a sort of possible explanation for the alien and UFO phenomena. But Dr. Ross, I mean, you just said that you've had some personal encounters with people that have sort of convinced you. Is that what, I suppose the question is, what convinces you that demons are real? Is it primarily the Bible, or are some of these personal encounters that you've experienced? Is that the main source of?
The Bible is a primary source, because I can use science to demonstrate that the Bible is inspired and inerrant. So I trust what it's got to say on these matters where I don't have the scientific tools. I do have a number of personal experiences, and I know a lot of people in my church and in my travels around the world, especially what I experienced in the Soviet Union, that persuades me, hey, there's actual evidence that we got here beyond what the Bible speaks about. But
Would you mind articulating those experiences for me?
Well,
if you're able to?
Yeah, I can do that. I remember speaking in a lecture hall in the Soviet Union, and about a quarter of the people in the audience, the moment I walked into the room, they began screaming and yelling at me and screaming and claiming that Jesus was guilty of vile sexual immorality. Now, I've run into people who take the Lord's name in vain, but typically they stop at accusing Jesus of a grossly immoral behavior. But these individuals didn't do that. Moreover, they were yelling and screaming at the top of their lungs, preventing me even to speak. And what I noticed is the other people in the audience basically said, oh, they're all demon possessed. That's what's going on here. And I said, well, let me come back tomorrow. So I came back the next day, but I brought another scientist with me who was a follower of Jesus Christ. And I said, I just want you to be at the back of the room and just pray that God would silence the demons from interrupting and speaking. So we did that. And these people, and we're talking, like 60 of them, they were completely quiet throughout the whole of the lecture. And these other people in the audience, these physicists, were saying, we've never seen this happen. They're always yelling and screaming, and now they're quiet. And so that's when they became believers that, hey, there's something more powerful than the forces within these individuals. And I've seen experiences in the area where I live, near Pasadena, California. I remember walking out of Caltech one day, and this woman, a good 150 feet away, started screaming and yelling at me. And the moment I looked at her, she collapsed and went into the fetal position and started shaking and yelling. And then she began screaming obscenities. And I could tell she was terrified. And that terror reigned within her until I walked away. And this is well documented in demonic literature, that these are some of the classic symptoms of somebody who's demon possessed, quite similar to what you read in the New Testament Gospels when Jesus encountered demons. And I remember going into a witchcraft coven, and this guy who was the warlock in the coven said, you think you know the Bible? Give me any verse in the Bible, and I got it memorized. In fact, I got it memorized forward and backwards. So I said, you know what? I believe you. But tell you what, pick a verse out of the Bible and explain its meaning to me. He couldn't do it. He had it memorized, but he couldn't explain the meaning of any verse in the Bible. But he demonstrated supernatural powers right in front of me. Says, look out the window. See that girl there? I can make her do a cartwheel at my command. And so there's a lady in the room who says, do it now. He did, and she started spinning a cartwheel. And he said, stop. She stopped. So you could clearly see he had some supernatural powers that were enabling to do this. But I knew that what the powers he was getting were not from the righteous angels, because he had enslaved about a 10 to 12 women in that home as his sexual slaves. And they're all terrified of him. But yeah, we were able to rescue those women from his clutch. So those are a few examples. I could give you a lot more, not just of my life, but the lives of others. But I'm persuaded that indeed these evil angels are real, and they have an agenda, and their agenda is to persuade as many humans as possible not to receive Jesus Christ as Creator, Lord, and Savior. That seems to be their main objective. I've seen instances where they cause the individual to commit suicide in order to prevent them from becoming a follower of Jesus Christ. So yes, but I'm also persuaded as a pastor is that it's a mistake to basically say, this is my ministry, this is my mission. I tell people in our church, if you encounter it, deal with it, but don't seek it, because God's actually got more productive things for you to do.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons I didn't ask Jimmy that question is because we've actually talked about that recently. But Jimmy, do you have anything that you'd like to add or share as we're about to switch into taking some super chat questions?
Yeah, no, not in particular. I respect Dr. Ross's experiences, and I'd have questions about him in individual cases about were all of these demonic, or could there be another way of looking at some of them? Mental illness, like with the screaming woman, would be one natural possibility. The classic signs of demonic possession are an alternative personality is manifest in that is able to do preternatural things, things that you wouldn't expect human nature to be able to do, and that displays an aversion to the holy. Because and you need all three of those. If there's no alternative personality, you don't have evidence for possession. You just got evidence for a psychic jerk. Right. If you have the preternatural abilities, well, actually, a lot of those, like one of them is speaking a foreign language you haven't studied. Well, that's also a gift of the Holy Ghost. And so, you need more than just something preternatural happening. That could be a gift of God. It could be something, a psychic ability. It could be anything like that. You need the third element, which is aversion to the holy. Yes. Like they can't stand looking at a picture of Jesus or saying his name or hearing about him or things like that. But if you have those three elements, you've got a plausible case of demonic possession. And so these experiences are real. They do happen. Demons are real. They can mess with people. There are different theories about how they come to mess with people. One thing that I'd be personally a little cautious about is the idea that they can get you through your grandfather or something. I know there are people who talk about family curses and stuff, but there's a counter tradition in Ezekiel and Jeremiah where people have been quoting the proverb, the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. And God says, that's not the way it's going to be anymore. So I have a question about whether they're going to get you through some familial connection, but these experiences are real. They do happen. We have to take them seriously. We should not dismiss them. And we should be careful in evaluating them. And just to kind of, I guess, touch base back on, we're having so much agreement here that just to touch base back on the subject of our overall discussion, while they may sometimes be involved in UFO cases, I don't see evidence for that being a universal phenomenon. So I want to hold open, just like I hold open, I don't know that aliens exist, but if they do, I want to hold open the possibility that they could be visiting us, but I don't want to dismiss the idea that there might be demons in individual particular cases.
Yeah. So let's let Dr. Ross have the last word before we change to taking some super chat questions.
No, all I want to say is I do agree with your three tests of the demonic. I think that's very wise. You want to have all three in place before you say, hey, this is definitively demonic. So thank you for articulating that.
Yeah. Got him from the Catholic Church's two rites of exorcism.
All right, let's move to some super chat questions. This one's from Blake Stone. Looks like we've got 3 from Blake. We'll get through these. Could it be that aliens are more akin to angels/demons than the secular world likes to admit, but also that angels and demons are more akin to aliens than the religious world likes to admit?
Yeah, let's start with question.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Dr. Ross.
Yeah, I mean, it's Jacques Vallée, the French astrophysicist, who's probably done more study in UFOs than anyone else. He's the one that coined the term interdimensional. And that would include angelic phenomena, but he defined it in such a way that it could include anything that's beyond the laws of physics and the space-time dimensions of the universe. And after all, he's an agnostic. He's not coming from a biblical or a Christian perspective. So I think that frames the question that's been asked here.
Jimmy,
I think that part of the difficulty is that we don't have a good understanding of either what angels are or what demons are. We know the basics. Angels are created intellects. Aliens would be some other kind of biological life form that would have an intellect the same way we do. But we don't have a detailed knowledge of the parameters of, the details of exactly what an angel is like or what a demon is like. We know some basic facts about them, but that's about it. It gets really speculative beyond the core facts. And so it's possible. So to answer Blake's question, could it be that aliens are more like angels or demons than the secular world likes to admit? Well, it could be. They could have some similarities. But the problem is we don't know if aliens exist. We don't know what they're like either. So there's a lot of possibilities. One difference is going to be angels do not natively have bodies and extraterrestrials do natively have bodies. On the flip question, could it also be that angels/demons are more akin to aliens than the religious world likes to admit? Well, I mean, God may have some assigned to alien planets. There could be angels. In fact, classically in the Middle Ages, the standard view was that there are angels for the other planets in the solar system. And so there could be extraterrestrial angels in that sense, and maybe extraterrestrial demons too. But that's something God hadn't really told us much about. So I have to leave all that up in the air.
We did have some earlier comments that came in. These were not super chats, but they were just very nice comments. I wanted to highlight some of them. TJ McCarty says, I can't believe this conversation is happening. I love Ross and Aken. That's awesome. And then Ryan says, this is an excellent stream. Thank you to our guests and Capturing Christianity. Thank you, Ryan. All right, let's get to another super chat. This one, again, from Blake Stone. Jimmy, please consider Timothy Alberino's book, Birthright. It offers evangelical speculation on ufology, which Richard Dolan has given attention to. Catholics will have to contend with this thesis.
Okay, I'll thank you, Blake. I'll check it out. I have not seen his book, but I do know who Richard Dolan is, and I'm happy to consider all points of view. So I'll check it out. Thank you.
All right, we've got one more super chat from Blake. He says, emotional insistence that aliens must be demonic in nature has seriously burned me and my Christian brethren. Ross, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think he's got a good point. When I read the UFO literature, they'll often say, well, 90 to 95% has a natural explanation or is a hoax or a secret military activity. Maybe because I'm an astronomer, for me, the percentage is much higher. It's around 99%. And so I do agree with him that we need to be cautious and skeptical when we hear reports about this matter. I mean, so whenever I run into someone who says, I've had this encounter, and I say, well, I got some questions for you. And my questions are basically saying, okay, the 99% is the most likely, let's go there. And if I can rule all that out, then I get into, okay, what could be happening? What evidence do I have that this is defying the laws of physics? And are there other observers? Some people say, yeah, this thing was moving at 15,000 miles through the atmosphere. And I say, well, if you're the only one that saw it, we can't prove that. In order to triangulate, you need at least 3 observers seeing the phenomena that are geographically separated from one another. So I don't give any credence to somebody talking about how fast it was, or like these pilot reports where they're claiming there was a big object outside of their cockpit. Well, maybe it was a fleck of paint that came off of their aircraft that's very tiny, but because it's up close, it looks big. And so trying to judge distance when you got a single observer, even if it's a jet aircraft pilot, that's where I have some skepticism. So I think the skepticism you're talking about is definitely warranted.
Any other thoughts on that, Jimmy?
Yeah, I think that this essentially reflects the evangelistic concern that I expressed in my opening remarks. And I think that Dr. Ross gave a very helpful and gracious answer to Blake. But I think that when Christians convey the idea that aliens must be demons, there are no other options on the table for a Christian, that it does put an evangelistic block between people who would otherwise consider Christianity, and it can even harm some people within the Christian community, like Blake indicates. I think we should be more cautious in our language and, acknowledge there are other options for what UFO entities, if there are any, because I'm not sold that there are, but if there are, I think we need to be careful to say that there are other possible explanations as well. We don't want to pretend demons are not a possibility, but we don't want to insist that they just must all be demons.
Yeah, and I would add that we got to be careful of attributing it to aliens like us on physical craft traveling to us from another planetary system. Because I get that a lot, people saying, well, that's what's happening. And I'm saying, well, what's the physical evidence for that? And we've already discussed this. As an astronomer, I don't see any physical evidence supporting that supposition and a lot of evidence against it. But again, I think it's appropriate. Let's make sure we don't go down these rabbit trails that are not productive and actually cause people a lot of emotional distress.
Yeah, and I would agree with Dr. Ross that that we shouldn't insist either that they're all extraterrestrials, because and it's not, and the two options are not just aliens and demons. There's also cryptoterrestrials, which would be a hidden race here on Earth, and there's interdimensionals, which can be either of the spiritual kind, like angels, or of a physical kind, because there can be other physical universes and other dimensions. And then there's also time travelers. So I'd say that there are at least 5 exotic options that have been proposed that could explain the entities reported to be on UFOs. And I think we have to be open to wherever the evidence points. If there are such craft, we can look at the evidence, and we shouldn't just be assuming it must be one of these 5. It could be any of the 5. Or all
where
of
I
the
would
5.
add a word of caution is appealing to other universes. Yes, astronomers do debate whether or not the cosmic inflation event produced other space-time realms, but it was Einstein himself who pointed out, hey, once you got observers, physical observers in a space-time realm, they cannot have any contact with other space-time realms. And that would also apply to beings in those other space-time realms. They could exist, but they can't travel from their universe to our universe. We can't go from our universe to their universe if we're talking physical beings. Now, we're talking angelic beings. That's another whole matter. And I think another caveat we need to put in here, the Bible talks about righteous angels as well as the fallen angels. Hebrews 13:2, referring to Christians. Many of you have been visited by these righteous angels unawares. They've been assisting you in ministry. So we shouldn't think that all angelic contacts are evil. I mean, and the Bible tells us we need to test the spirits to see if we're dealing with the evil angels or the righteous angels. And I think the tests are really valid.
I agree, and I appreciate the fact, Dr. Ross, that you cite 1 John 4, which is the test of the spirits passage, because a lot of people that I encounter don't want to do that. They just want to, if it's a spirit, run away from it. Don't have anything to do with it. That's not the attitude the Bible expects of us. It expects us to test the spirits, and that means being willing to interact with them. Now, of course, once you determine this is a deceptive spirit, this is a bad one, cut off all contact. Don't believe anything it says, because they're working for the father of lies. But until that determination is made, we're expected to perform the test. And for that, you got to actually have communication. I would just have a note, what you said about Einstein saying things can't get from one universe to another. That's true under the limitation of light speed. But if light speed is surmountable, then it would become possible to have communication between different universes.
Yeah, but there again, look at what it takes to distort the space-time fabric.
Not saying we can do it.
Yeah, I'm basically saying it can't be done, period, unless you've got a technology that's able to convert the mass of Jupiter into pure energy per second. And that's
Maybe
why
some do.
Well, the team at Baylor that published this said, this is a mathematical concept, but clearly, regardless of technological achievement, this is never going to be possible. It can't be done.
Well, I think there are different views on that. I'm just trying to leave open options. I'm not advocating any views. I'm just leaving options open.
Well, the problem is if you're converting that much energy, matter into energy per second, how do physical beings survive that? I mean, that's one of the things that these three theoretical physicists of Baylor pointed out. Yeah, we can make the spaceship go faster than the speed of light, but we can't keep anything that is made up of proteins survive that event because you got to release the energy very close to the spaceship. And if you release that much energy per second, you basically kill everybody on board.
Well, and the difficulty is we're looking at this problem from the beginning of what could be a 10,000-year journey, and there can be solutions that are found. We've already found some solutions to particular problems in this area in just the last 20 years of looking at the problem. And give us another 10,000, we may solve a few more problems. So I just don't want to be dogmatic about what will be possible 10,000 or a million years from now.
Yeah, but again, consider the energetics. We're talking extreme energetics.
I understand.
Yeah.
Let's do this. We actually got through the super chats really quickly, so let's turn back to our talking points. One thing that we haven't really discussed is whether or not the broad Christian doctrines actually conflict with the demons aliens hypothesis, or if they support the demons aliens hypothesis. Dr. Ross, do you see that any essential Christian doctrines lead us to think that the demons aliens hypothesis is true? Do you see any overlap there, or are you just kind of open and you're like, I'm just, based on the physics, I don't really see it as a possibility?
Well, I've written articles on this that you can see at reasons.org, making the point that Christian scholars for 2,000 years have debated, did God create physical beings elsewhere in the universe, or are we humans alone in the universe as being, the intelligent beings? And you've had Christians on both sides for 2,000 years. And even with all of our advanced technology and knowledge, you still have Christians on both sides. So the options are open. The reason I wrote those articles is to make the point, if you're an atheist, you don't have those options. An atheist is basically forced to conclude that naturalistic science will spontaneously produce intelligent civilizations all over the universe. So the Christians got options, the atheist doesn't. And that's interesting because atheists often accuse us of not having options. It's the other way around. And in terms of what the Bible says about angels and demons, I think we can trust everything the Bible says about that. Moreover, I think we got lots of evidence. Yes, Jim, you might think that it's anecdotal, but it is consistent with what the Bible teaches about the behavior of the righteous angels and the behavior of the fallen angels. So I think we would agree that that allows for considerable discussion and debate on these issues.
Mm-hmm. I would definitely agree that there have been multiple views on what else God might have created all the way down through history. Actually, one of the issues that I'm sure you're aware that was debated in the 1200s was, could God create another universe? And what they were conceiving of as the universe was different than what we think of. As you know, the idea that we live in a sea of galaxies, that's a 20th century idea. Even down to 1920, when the astronomical great debate happened, there was a debate about, is the Milky Way the only thing in the universe or not?
Right.
But historically, the universe was conceived of as the Earth at the center with a series of concentric shells around it. The most distant shell was the shell of the fixed stars, the ones that don't change their position as they rotate, where the constellations are. And that shell was thought of in Ptolemaic astronomy as being just beyond the orbit of Saturn. And so they envisioned the universe as basically this slightly larger than Saturn's orbit bubble. And there was a big debate among the medieval theologians about, could God make another one of those? And some individuals, including people like Thomas Aquinas, took positions in this and said, well, God wouldn't or couldn't or things like that. And the Bishop of Paris intervened, because these were ideas being discussed at the University of Paris, and he issued the condemnations of 1276, which rejected a number of these ideas that were being proposed. And it's been noted that the condemnations of 1276 protected the idea of God's omnipotence and ability to do things, like God could make other universes with other peoples in them and stuff, and they've been cited as one of the early steps protecting the rise of modern science, because you had a recognition from church authorities that theologians should not be unduly restricting what God can do. And that left open possibilities to be explored by scientists. And so I definitely agree there have been different positions, and I guess I'm trying to do something similar here in just saying, let's keep our options open.
Right. And, it's not just the 12th century AD, because Christians throughout the whole history of the church have recognized, in addition to the physical universe in which we live, there's heaven, there's hell, there's the angelic realm, there's a new creation. And so clearly, God has the power to create other realms. How many, we don't know. Moreover, he might have it on a timeline. Who knows if the new creation is going to be the last thing he creates? Maybe he's got a lot on his future calendar that he hasn't told us about. So there's
I
a
like
lot
the
of
way you think.
Well, the whole point is the Bible doesn't tell us everything that God has done or will do. What I think is encouraging is he says, you redeemed humans are going to be working with me as magistrates to manage what I'll be creating. That to me is really exciting, that long after this universe has fulfilled its purpose and no longer exists, we are going to be going into these extra realms. So I think it's a mistake for a Christian to actually take the position the universe is all there is. And I've actually written articles making the point, restoration theology, I think, is a mistake. God's not going to restore the universe. He's going to replace the universe. But that won't happen until evil is conquered and eradicated permanently. But that's another theological issue that we could talk about. No need to do that. But I think, I'm impressed at how much we actually agree upon and how much we basically are saying we need to look at this with a healthy dose of skepticism.
So let's take another super chat, and this will probably be our last one. Then we'll turn to some closing comments. Slam RN, again, the moderator that actually helped put this conversation together. She says, how far out can we see that galaxy clusters which encompass the local group? Can we surmise that higher civilizations would be totally inhospitable due to intense radiation or other factors?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, what we're now able to do is actually detect supermassive black holes in galaxies out to a great distance and measure their characteristics. And you can actually go online and get a peer-reviewed paper I've written. It's Black Holes as Evidence of God's Care, basically making the point of we're talking advanced life, like we humans are manifesting. We're basically living in the one spot in the Virgo supercluster where advanced life is possible. And now we're going out to 60 million light years. Now, when you get beyond 60 million light years, we can't be that dogmatic, because once you get beyond 60 million light years, it's a little more challenging to determine the characteristics of these supermassive black holes. But one of the things that has impressed me is not only are we in a unique location in the Virgo supercluster of galaxies, we seem to be at a unique time. So, for example, we're existing at a time when the supermassive black hole in our Milky Way galaxy is quieter than it's ever been. That's simultaneously true about the supermassive black hole in the center of the Andromeda galaxy. And if either one of them were to return to its normal activity, we would not be able to have global civilization here on Earth. Or if one of the supermassive black holes in the core of the Virgo supercluster were to have its relativistic jet pointed a little more closely towards us, once again, we'd be in trouble. Now, that wouldn't rule out microbial life, and it wouldn't necessarily rule out the existence of a few thousand or maybe even a low million of human beings with a Stone Age technology, but it would certainly rule out the possibility of billions of us living on the planet with global high technology civilization. But you can check that out in the paper, Black Holes as Evidence of God's Care. And what's interesting about that paper, too, is I had 3 astrophysicists who are not believers who offered some very strong criticism. And you can read their critiques. That's all public. You can also read my responses to their critiques.
Dr. Ross, I'd love to have you back on Capturing Christianity. Maybe we can set something up on talking about the different arguments and evidence for the existence of God. That's kind of like one of the main things that we discuss here on Capturing Christianity. But what we really only have time to kind of summarize the conversation. And so, Dr. Ross, I'd like to give it back to you. Take a few minutes. We didn't plan this out, so feel free to skip it if you just don't even feel like summarizing your thoughts on the conversation. But let's move into some just closing thoughts. We'll give you, Dr. Ross, 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll give Jimmy same, and then we'll close things out.
And I think both of us have repeatedly summarized our position, so I'll keep my remarks short. And I like what I heard from Jimmy is that we need to test the spirits. Realize that there is a spirit realm. It's real. We have a lot of evidence for that spirit realm, but we need to be cautious how we deal with it. And so put the spirits to the test. Don't believe everything that you see that apparently comes from a spirit realm. I would argue that these residual UFOs, not the 99%, are one manifestation of this. But also don't be too frightened. That, yes, there are fallen angels out there, but notice there are more righteous angels than there are fallen angels according to the Bible. As it tells us in the book of Hebrews, God is actually using these righteous angels to assist those of us who are followers of Jesus Christ to be more productive in our ministry and serving Him. And so just realize, indeed, many of us have entertained angels unawares. And typically, when they do come into our life to assist us in ministry, often what I've noted is that it's for a few seconds. It's brief, but it's significant in making some headway in making our ministry more productive.
Jimmy, now you've got 2 or 3 minutes to summarize.
Okay, so I think that we've discovered a very substantial element or of agreement between Dr. Ross and myself. I agree we need to test the spirits. I agree that the spiritual realm is real, and we are not to dismiss ideas of involvement of either angels or demons with human life. We do need evidence if you want to propose demons. And I've mentioned the 3 classic criteria for diagnosing a possession, and they could apply with modifications to other situations. When it comes to UFOs, I've said I don't know. I agree that 99% of them can be explained in other ways, in purely natural ways. But there are some that are harder to explain in purely naturalistic terms, and it could be, I'm not saying it is, but it could be there is an exotic explanation for those. That exotic explanation could be extraterrestrial, cryptoterrestrial, interdimensional of the spiritual sort, interdimensional of the physical sort, and time travel. And it could be any one or all of those. Explaining these residual cases. Because one possible explanation is demonic, and we know demons can impersonate other things, I would say that demons are that demons are a possibility. And if you've got the evidence that a particular case or set of cases is demonic, then I don't have any problem with that. I'd want to see the evidence, but I don't have a problem with it. My problem is with just declaring these other explanations off the table as options for Christians. I think that we should leave them on the table, partly because I think the evidence is open to those other interpretations, and partly because I think it will help us avoid an evangelistic problem by fighting the narrative that Christians are a bunch of superstitious fanatics. And so I think we want to show the world that we are open-minded and willing to consider different options.
Yeah,
so
and as a physicist, I would say that at least some of what he's saying is off the table. And that's the difference we have. He thinks they're on the table. I would cite physics saying, no, we can actually say they're off the table.
And I'd say there are physicists who agree with me too.
Well, I wanted to just kind of address the audience. I'm sure if you're watching up until this point, you've watched this entire show, you're probably going to be interested in learning more about my two guests. So, Dr. Ross, would you mind taking a couple minutes and just explain how people can find more about what you do?
Well, our website's reasons.org, and people can get free chapters of 8 of my books at reasons.org/Ross. I also take questions on my Facebook and Twitter page. And I actually sponsor a class for skeptics every Sunday at paradoxes.org, and people can ask questions there live.
Nice. What about you, Jimmy?
Well, I work for Catholic Answers. Our website is Catholic.com. I like how Dr. Ross's is reasons.org. Ours is Catholic.com. We both thought ahead back in the 1990s when domains like that were still available. Also, my personal website is jimmyaken.com. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/Jimmy Aken. All you got to do to get there is spell my name correctly. It's Jimmy with a Y, and Aken is just like it sounds. Akin. There are no T's, E's, or S's. It's just Aken. And if you go to youtube.com/Jimmy Aken, you can find all my videos. I have a new video coming out every day right now. And every Friday, I have an episode of Jimmy Aken's Mysterious World. It's a top 20 documentary podcast on Apple Podcasts in the U.S. We have over 100,000 listeners, and we tackle all kinds of different mysteries, scientific, historical, theological, paranormal, UFOs, Bigfoot, all that good stuff. So if you want to get a reasoned perspective and a Christian faith perspective on those topics, head on over to youtube.com/Jimmy Aken.
And I will just remind the audience, you've been watching this on Capturing Christianity. If you enjoyed this type of content, you'll probably enjoy the other videos that we do. So consider subscribing, liking the video, share it, do whatever else you want to do. We also do need your support. We are still in a fundraising phase. So if you go to patreon.com/Capturing Christianity, you can get things in return for your support of our ministry. And with that, let's go ahead and end things out. We've got a lot of things, a lot of exciting new content that we're going to be publishing on Capturing Christianity very soon. We've got a few really exciting live streams next week, so you guys definitely want to stay tuned.
And before we go, just a reminder to do all those great YouTube things. You can help my channel grow by liking, commenting, and sharing the video. And be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so that you always get notified when I have a new video. These days, I have multiple videos coming out every week. Thanks so much, and God bless you.